Good morning, podcast. Welcome to the Pierre T. Lambert show. I am Pierre, your host, and today you are on a special episode with James Popsys. Guys, James is a travel and landscape photographer that I've been trying to have that podcast with for quite some time. And I'm very pleased to bring that conversation to you because today we're going to be digging into how he got started into landscape photography, how did he get started with his YouTube channel, and most importantly, how he approaches the whole creative exercise of taking photos. And I think that part will be gold for you, especially when we talk about what the stories are behind shots and how do you actually convey that story to your viewer behind just the photo. And to top it off, we will be talking about creative block and how to get out of it. So I'm very pumped to share that conversation with you guys. So if you're ready, grab your phone and get some context on James. Hit him up on Instagram or on YouTube. It's James and then Popsys, Popsys. And if you're ready, let's get started. Let's welcome James to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you very much. I feel like we've been trying to do this for, too long. And I kept saying I was busy and it's good to get started.
Yes, I think it's been since I started the podcast. So it's a good time to start now. James, I've got a question for you. If I say photography, what is the one photo that shows up in your mind right now?
I'd say it's a CRISPR card photo, the cover of Under an Arctic Sky. I've never heard that question before. That's a good one.
I like your answer. What impacts you in that photo?
Well, I think it's because, basically, it's probably for the same reason that I love watching kind of photography channels on YouTube and that I spend a lot of time making videos for YouTube, is that with that one, obviously, there's a Netflix documentary that you kind of get to see the behind the scenes of the image. And that kind of gives you so much more perspective about the photo. It kind of tells you the story of how difficult it was to get, the kind of suffering that went into it, the adventure that went into it, the relationships that went into it. And for me, at least, that kind of having moving images that can tell the story of a still is always going to result in a more memorable, more interesting photo. So I guess that's probably the reason. But like I said, I've never come across that question before, so I didn't necessarily know that would have been the answer had you not asked it.
That's why I love asking you, because it's not something we think about intuitively, and that's why if you ask the question, there's always an image that pops up in your mind, like even if it starts with a roll of 20, there is one that's at the beginning, and that's the interesting part. I love what you're saying on story and the behind the shot. Is that, you would say, why you kind of started documenting and like shooting your own YouTube videos?
I think so. I mean, I love photography, but photography for me has always been like a kind of a secondary thing, really. It's kind of, I like photography because it's a way of documenting an experience or a place or a time in your life, not necessarily because I love photography as like the primary hobby or the primary job. It's a means to other things in many ways. And so kind of having a YouTube channel means that I kind of get to relive times of my life or particular trips where I was getting particular photos. And both those things together kind of help me to kind of remember what typically are quite enjoyable experiences. Not always, but typically quite enjoyable experiences. So I think that, being able to tell stories about photos and to be able to, as I said, with that image of Chris's, being able to kind of go behind the scenes of the shot, just kind of helps to almost kind of separate your work from other people, not necessarily in terms of quality, but in terms of the reason for existing. And as we speak about a lot as photographers, it's always kind of an increasingly populated marketplace. And so any way that you can get to talk about your work more or to explain what it is that you're trying to do is going to have the benefit of other people understanding it better, which I don't think is ever a bad thing.
That makes sense. In a way, it gives context behind it. It's like the photo is a cherry on top of the cake, but there is a whole cake that no one sees.
That's exactly it. And for all that we try to tell stories with images and try to kind of get across what it is that we've experienced or what we've enjoyed, what we've not enjoyed, the people that we've experienced things with, the places that we've been. For all that we try to do that in single images or even in sets of images, sometimes it's quite difficult. And I think you can always tell a more rounded story when you're able to put words to those images and pictures to those images as well. So that wasn't the intention at the start of my kind of YouTube experience. Basically, I was in New Zealand for it was supposed to be a 2-month trip. We booked it wrong, so it ended up a bit longer than that. But I was with Emily, and we were doing a bit of a tour of New Zealand, and we wanted a way to document it outside of me taking photos, because that's what I'd spend all my time doing otherwise. And I think Emily had got a bit sick of it. So I managed to persuade her that somehow video would be different from that. And it wasn't really, but what it meant was that we kind of got more diverse content that has 2 or 3 years on enabled us to look back at that trip in a different way that we hadn't been able to before. So I took a load of video footage, had no idea how to edit it at the time, but got back, put it on YouTube, and found to my amazement that I really enjoyed the experience. And so that very quickly became part of what I tried to do with my time, really.
That's pretty cool. How did you balance it out? Because maybe you can tell us a little bit more. Did you have a full-time job at the time? If you were on holiday, I guess so. And what was it?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a strange set of circumstances, really. I mean, so I had a normal office job, a marketing job in London, right from when I left university up until the back end of 2015, when Emily and I, who is my fiance, we decided to move to Sydney. We had some friends in Sydney. We'd been to Sydney in the past and always loved it when we'd been. So we wanted to move to Sydney. And at the time, we had no idea how long that was going to be for. But after 18 months, we decided it was too far away and that we missed home, basically. And also, I wanted the opportunity to branch out and to try and give professional photography a go, because it had been just a hobby basically for a long time before that, and I was dedicating all my evenings, all my weekends to that pursuit. And it was going to be very difficult to set up shop in Sydney, a long way from home and a long way from the parts of the world that I wanted to spend time taking photos of. So we decided to come home, and before that we decided that it was going to be a good time to go back to New Zealand, which is one of our favorite places, because we didn't know how long it'd be before we could spend 2 months on the wrong side of the world from where we were. So it just worked out to be a good time to do that trip. And then the plan was that we'd get back, and that's when I would start my endeavor to become a working photographer. And that's exactly what happened. We got pretty lucky in terms of finance, from the standpoint that Emily was applying to do PhDs. And as a result, we were staying with parents while she applied and worked out whereabouts in the UK we were going to be based, which meant that I had a runway essentially of kind of 6 or 9 months, I think it was, where I had to pay very minimal rent to my parents, which is very nice of them. But it meant that I didn't have kind of huge pressure for the first handful of months to be bringing in new clients and constant invoices and stuff. I could build from the ground up. And that's exactly what I did with things like my YouTube channel at that time, really. So it worked very well, and we got very lucky. And as you will know, it was super hard work and still is, but it's worked out quite nicely. And it kind of, a lot of people say to me, what do you want to do next? Is this kind of you now? Is this your dream job? And my answer, as you may find too, is that I don't really know, because I'm constantly asking myself the question of what could I do next, which is how I ended up here in the first place, I feel. And so, yeah, who knows?
It's a It's a tough question. What do you want to do next when you are actually doing it in a way?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, maybe that's probably where I struggle sometimes, because I second guess myself and try and, because I got used to for so long wondering how I would get to do what I'm currently doing. There is in the back of my mind this question of, could it be better, or could I be spending more my time more efficiently, or on something that I enjoyed even more, or whatever. And the answer probably is that I should take more time to enjoy where I'm at now. But there we go. That's perhaps for a conversation with a therapist more than a
Well, I think it's a very interesting it's super interesting topic, simply because it doesn't apply only, in my opinion, to what you're saying with life. I feel like even if we had to bring it back to just a photo experience, or your whole holidays, even if you're not into photography or video, and there's always a moment where you get to those holidays, and after 2 days, you actually get into it, and you kind of forget how much you anticipated it before and how much you wanted to get there. And once you're there, it's like the magic, almost, you get caught up in the details, instead of sitting back and looking at the big picture and being like, wow, let's just enjoy it for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find, in fact, on that trip that I was talking about before, like I found with lots of long trips that I've done, that I kind of have this ceiling of 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, the novelty of where I am, regardless of how good it is, wears off, and it starts to become normal. And I think that's one of our biggest problems as kind of citizens of the developed world, is that we get so used to stuff so quickly. Like, you see the phone, the queues outside Apple stores for iPhones, but for sure, and I've experienced this before, that after 2 weeks, that phone is not a new phone. It's just your phone, and you've got used to it, and the shine's gone off it. You've gotten completely used to the new features that it has. And it's much the same with cameras, as all of us as photographers know. You kind of, once you get used to something new, it just becomes normal, and the shine goes from it. So yeah, that is one of the that is
so true. Maybe I'm going to ask you if you do that, and maybe anyone listening might be doing the same. When you get a new camera, do you get like super cautious on a new lens, and then after a week or 2 you start just throwing it in your bag as if it was normal?
I do, but what I find annoying about that is not the time when I kind of I start throwing it in my bag. What I find annoying is the time when I'm looking after it, and I'm making sure I don't get any scratches or any dust or on anything, because that's not really how cameras should be treated, which sounds odd, because people probably say, well, maybe you get given cameras, or you get discount off cameras or whatever. And that's not really the point. Cameras are tools. And I think if you can't afford to break your camera or to have problems with your camera, then you probably can't afford the camera, because it needs to be used. Like, it needs to be out in the world in quite harsh environments. And I've been on workshops and on trips and expeditions and stuff before, where there have been times where I've kind of had to dump a camera into the snow to go and make sure that I'm, say, capturing a time lapse on another camera, and that I'm not missing stuff. And I've had to just ditch one of them for minutes, or slam it down onto a rock just to go and make sure that I'm getting something else with another camera. And people can't really believe it when they see that. But firstly, most cameras these days are pretty rugged. And secondly, you kind of, that's what they're built for. They're built to get an end result. And if you're too scared to use them in a way that yields an end result, then it's pointless having them. So yeah, I do find that. I definitely find that when I first kind of get a camera, I'm looking after it, and I'm making sure it's not got any scratches or any problems with it or anything. But I find that part of the ownership the most annoying. Kind of when that wears off, I get a sense of relief, because I know that I can get down to business with it and probably get the most from it.
I love what you're saying, because it is literally a tool, and if you're not able to use it, if you're not fearless enough to use it in conditions where it's going to be more difficult, but it's going to yield different results, and maybe the one you were trying to get, but you're a little afraid. I definitely will agree with you that you need to. It's a good segue where, like, if you can't afford it, if you can't afford to break it, maybe you shouldn't even use it in the first place. Because I remember Casey Neistat a few years ago. I remember watching one of his videos, and he keeps breaking cameras. But I remember him saying he would choose the shot over the camera every single time.
and I feel the same. I feel a lot of the time when I see people on workshops and things, and they've got super expensive cameras and they're being really, really careful with them. And I'm not an advocate for breaking cameras unnecessarily, or mistreating cameras unnecessarily, or wasting anything. Like I'm really not. But at the same time, I'd prefer somebody to have a camera they're willing to use properly, even if it's not a camera that's as capable as something that they technically could buy but couldn't necessarily afford to use properly. And
makes sense.
That makes sense or not, but yeah, it's
it makes sense. It's like the guy that buys a Ferrari but cannot afford to put gas in it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a good one. I have a question that I've been asked a few times, and it's kind of, I think you're going to be way better than me to answer that one. How do you kind of get started with landscape photography?
Good question. It's interesting to me, this question, because I get it as well sometimes, and I always have trouble trying to work out whether I would define myself as a landscape photographer or not in the first place, because I take lots of photos that involve landscapes. Typically, I'm trying to convey something that's kind of in the landscape as opposed to the landscape itself. And also, lots of people ask me for advice about things like tripods and filters, because they see lots of landscape photographers working very methodically with those two things. And I hate working with tripods, and I hate working with filters, and I hate waiting for light and things. I'd much prefer to be kind of running around, experiencing a place and taking 100 photos. And if one of them works, great. If not, I've had a great time running around. So I work quite differently to how a lot of kind of people who define themselves as landscape photographers would work. My route into photography was a bit of a strange one, in that I really struggled at first, because I kind of saw photography as this, like a potential creative outlet. Like I always considered myself a creative person, but I never kind of honed in on a particular creative pursuit. And I thought photography could be it until I lived in London and would go and find unique compositions or ways to take photos. And as a beginner, I really struggled, because everything that I saw, I'd already seen before, and therefore it seemed pointless to take photos of. And that's when I discovered composite photography. So I discovered how to use layering in Photoshop and how to blend images together. And then that was my the lighting of the match for me as far as photography was concerned, because my imagination was the limit, basically, rather than the places that I could go that were different to places other people had been to take photos. So that was kind of the catalyst for me. And then I did that for a while as a commercial photographer. I did composite photography. And it was only when I started spending a lot more time trying to make videos that I realized I didn't have the patience to sit at a computer for as long as I'd need to if I was going to edit composite images, which in some cases took 30 or 40 hours to put together, and edit videos. So I kind of had to choose one of the two. And as I said before, I didn't quite anticipate how much I'd enjoy the making of the YouTube videos.
That's interesting. So I want to segue on, actually go back on what you said about like the photographers in landscape who have the tripod and going to spend like a long time setting up the shot versus you running around like a wild rabbit. No, I'm just saying it that way. It sounds more fun. How do you, what's your philosophy? Do you think one is better than the other? Have you tried to sit down with your tripod for hours? Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, I think one is better than the other, but I don't think the answer is the same for any two people. So it's so important that you find what works for you. And whenever people ask, as I'm sure they do for you too, people ask me a lot if I can look at their images and give my opinion, or what my opinion is on certain aspects of photography. And I always kind of give the prerequisite that what I'm giving them is literally just one person's opinion. And regardless of someone else's experience or their achievements with a camera, even if you have like a world-class photographer, which I wouldn't class myself as, even if you have someone that's achieved everything in their pursuit, they're still just one person. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're better than other people, or that their opinion and their method is better than what anyone else might come up with. So it's all about finding what works for you. And to put it kind of bluntly, if I go to a place and I sit with my tripod set up because I found a composition and I'm just waiting for some light, or I'm waiting for golden hour or whatever it might be, I get really bored. Like, as I said, photography is it's really a secondary thing. I'm more when I'm taking photos, I'm enjoying it because I'm enjoying what I'm taking photos of. I'm enjoying being in an amazing place or witnessing something incredible. For me, that's the joy. And photography is just the way to kind of make sure that I can see it more in future. So, finding what works for you. I mean, I know plenty of other people who really enjoy setting up a tripod and being methodical and having a particular image, and maybe going to recce for one particular image.
That makes sense.
But it's different for everybody, really.
Oh, it totally is. The reason is that I was really digging into it is that, I get asked the same questions with like the gear and like what tripod, and the tripod question is really the question I would never think I would ever get. It's like, it doesn't matter. it's like take anything it doesn't matter. They're all the same, kind of. But yeah, after that like section, like how do you do landscape photography, and I had Nigel on the podcast, who's I believe, from what I've seen and understood from him, he's very methodological.
Yes.
And in his approach with his tripod and everything. And at the back of my head, I couldn't help but think, am I crazy? Because I don't think I could stay for 40 minutes in the same spot with my tripod at the same location. And I was kind of asking myself, so when people were asking me advice, I'm like, well, I don't know what I should tell them. Should I tell them, no, actually do whatever you want, just run around, or try to stay long enough to get the one shot you think you can get? I'm more like you, where I'm just going to run everywhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what I try to say to people is that, for me at least, photography is much more about the process than the end result. Like I love, as I say, kind of just being outdoors in some incredible place, or on, I don't know, an incredible bus journey or whatever it might be. And that for me is the goal. It's not necessarily taking photos that I'm going to be really pleased with. That's the taking of the photos is more just so I can remember it. And it turns out that, that's how I make my money now as well. So it's handy to be able to document it well. But yeah, as far as kind of the enjoyment goes, it's all about just the process. And just going on to what you said there about Nigel, he is someone, I think, having kind of seen him work a number of times, he is someone that you can tell loves the way that he does things. He really, really enjoys how he does things, which means that for him, he's doing it right. And for me, I work an entirely different way, which I think for me means that I'm doing it right. So when people ask if they're doing it the right way, or if I'm doing it the right way, or is there some kind of middle ground? I think the most important thing is to try lots of different stuff and see what sticks, because as I say, that I think there is a right.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the most important is just that do you and be happy with what you're doing. If you're not happy, try something different and see where that takes you, if that makes you feel happier. I almost wanted to compare it to fishing. You know, like some people like to sit and like pull a line and wait for the fish to go, and some people like to fly fish and walk in the rivers, you know. So that's the closest analogy I found lately.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think a lot of the time there's a tendency to want to look at photography as like quite a scientific thing, you know, like the way we assess gear, the way we talk about things like composition, the way we talk about things like color theory and light. Like there's a real push in some cases to want to think about photography as like a sweet science. But in reality, it's still very much an art, which means that it's all about individuality. It's all about creativity. It's all about coming up with your own way of doing things. And that can be quite counterintuitive, I think, particularly for somebody who, like you, makes videos which are at least to some degree kind of instructional or made with the intention of trying to help people or give people tips. Is that you need to be quite conscious that there is no right answer, and that people don't have to do things your way, and the way that you do things isn't necessarily the right way. You know, it's just a way. And as long as you're clear about that, then I think hopefully, you know, you can still find that you're able to help some people, providing that is the primary message, that it's most important that you find a way that works for you.
Yeah, definitely. What works for you is the key, but it takes many trials and many years to get to, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that can be part of the fun as well, you know, like we're all on a journey of improvement, and it's a fruitless task, because I don't think any of us get to the point where we feel like, we couldn't possibly get better at taking pictures. I think all of us will constantly be on this journey that will probably no doubt have any end, and that the point is that we enjoy the journey, not necessarily just when we get to a place when we're super happy with every single photo that we take, because I don't think that ever happens.
That's so funny. I had to encourage you to watch my video that's dropping tomorrow about the knobbox, and just skip straight. I mean, you can watch the whole thing, but skip straight to the last 30 seconds of the video. There's a blooper, and I think you will be quite surprised, because it feels like we're repeating or we're talking about the same thing I talked about completely randomly the other day. It doesn't make sense in the video, but it's kind of funny. Okay. James, tell me about that. Tell me about a bad image with a great story. Would you have that in mind?
A bad image with a great story. Let me think. I was about to try and quickly look at my website, but I don't think I'd ever put anything that I hated on my website. A bad image with a good story. I don't know. I might need to think about that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've taken thousands of bad images, but the only one it's one of those things. If I had 3 hours, I bet I could come up with thousands of terrible images I've taken and talk about all the pitfalls I'd come across trying to get them. The only one that I can think of is when I was in Greenland last year, and I was getting way too excited trying to take photos of these incredible whales. And it was the first time in a long time that I'd shot with super thick gloves on. As you can imagine, Greenland, it was very, very cold. And I kept, without knowing, sticking my finger or my thumb across the camera to switch to manual focus. And it was only a super slight movement. But the result was that all of the pictures that I took of this whale, and we were there, 2 hours trying to take these photos of whales, every single one of them was somewhere between slightly out of focus and horrifically out of focus. And so yeah, that was a lesson in wearing gloves and taking photos. I'm trying to think of others.
That sounds pretty fun already. In the sense where it's not only so similar stuff have happened to me, and I kind of want to ask you, what was your lesson that you took away from it?
So the lesson was either let my hands freeze, don't wear gloves, or if I am wearing gloves, keep my thumb well away from the camera anytime I'm about to press the shutter. That's what I learned from that. So I haven't had that experience again yet. So fingers crossed that's fixed it.
I started doing something where, because that has happened to me, not with gloves, but just with situation where I get so excited and I just start shooting and stuff, and I'd forget to review at least one or two images. And then when I don't do that, I end up with a series that might have had a problem, or like that stupid lens hood that I actually just lost was broken. And so it would turn 45 degree and suddenly it would add vignette on all the images when I was wide. And that was literally a lesson where it's like, whatever your situation and you know it's really good or you're getting really excited, I started just reviewing, like zooming in into each photo, taking like 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It doesn't take more than that, but just forcing myself to do it.
100%. And I think that kind of, it's one of the reasons that I think I take so many photos and that I much prefer kind of rushing around to get lots of different compositions and angles and stuff as opposed to setting up and just getting a couple of shots. Because I know that some people prefer to literally just get one photo. You know, they don't even get a backup. They don't really check the photos. There's no kind of concern that there might be something that they haven't spotted on the back of their camera that could cause problems in the future. No, they don't seem to suffer from that. Whereas me, I'm the kind of person that when I travel, I'll take like 7 travel adapters in case 6 of them don't work, because I cause disaster. And so I like to kind of try and build in redundancy. And I think it's because of experiences like that where you get home and you find out that you've not got what you hoped for. And you then try and tell yourself what I was talking about before, which is it's about the process, not the result. And sometimes I'm not very good at taking my own advice on that wavelength. So, yeah, there we go.
That makes sense. You speaking of the process actually makes me question something. I want to ask you, it's something I ask kind of every guest. It's how do you get out of a creative block? What advice do you give people? And like, how do you do it for yourself?
I think I kind of take time away from whatever the issue is. So I think a lot of the time, if I'm finding that I'm not taking photos that I'm happy with, then I'll just give myself some time away from taking photos, which sounds kind of completely against what I said about the process. You'd kind of think that I'd approach it by just trying to enjoy the process more. But I think a lot of the time, you know, regardless of how much you enjoy something, you can just have too much of it. And I find that there's kind of for me at least, there's a sweet spot for the amount of work that I do and the amount of work that I create as a result of that, and being happy with it. So I find if I'm out and about taking too many photos, if I'm doing too many trips, if I'm spending too much time trying to take photos, then that can have as negative effect on my overall output as not being out enough trying to take photos. I think there's a real sweet spot, and it'll be different for everyone. You know, some people will only get joy from being out kind of once every couple of months with their camera in the hills or wherever they like to take photos. And for other people, they might find that unless they go out with their camera every day, they kind of get into a funk and that they can't really get into the swing of it. I guess, again, it's different for everyone, but I certainly find that more often than not, if I'm not happy with what I'm creating, either with images or YouTube videos, whatever it might be, it's more often than not because I'm trying to do too much of it and I'm trying to force it. So yeah, I try to go and just do something completely different. Like I really like golf. Typically I play golf. I like cycling, and I'll just try and do things like that to take my mind somewhere completely different. And that's how I try and resolve it a lot of the time.
That's great advice, I think, for anyone, especially because a lot of people, I mean, they just get bored because they're always in the same location, or they shoot too much their city, and life gets in the way. I get a lot of messages like that. They're like, yeah, you're always in cool places, but how do you deal with it when you're kind of in the same area? Do you have you're a lot in the Lake District, if I'm correct? Do you have a recommendation of how you make it fresh again for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's difficult because like the answer really is sometimes, at least for me, to try and take myself to different places, and the response that you get from that is that that's A, expensive, B, time consuming, and I definitely get that. And I think it comes back to spending too much time doing stuff. Like, you can have too much of a good thing, and I think it's normal that if you spend too much time in one place, that you're going to get bored of it, or you're not going to enjoy it as much as you used to. And I think it comes back to that point we were talking about before about normalization and just kind of the novelty of something wearing off. And I think it's kind of, you can make parallels between the process of actually shooting the photos and the process of editing. Like, if you were to spend, I don't know, 24 hours straight editing one photo, I think chances are that by the end of it, it would look horrific. It would look horrible. It would look completely disgusting. And that's because you've spent too much time with it. Like, the way to deal with it is to deal with it in real small chunks, so that every time that you come back to it, you've got a fresh pair of eyes. And so that's kind of the way that I approach editing photos, but it's also the way that I try and approach shooting. It's kind of a little and often, or making sure that you at least you don't spend too much time doing it. And when you enjoy it, or you do it as a job, that can be quite challenging. But I think everybody kind of has a limit in terms of their capacity for things like attention and creativity, and knowing where that limit is for you is important, I think. Yeah,
that definitely. I think we're gonna leave everyone with those thoughts, because it's just great what you just said, especially about the part where you can't overdo it, and taking it in small chunks is literally something I suggested, or I got suggested, even like for heavy-headed. People used to tell me back in the days that, like, do an hour on it, then let it sit, come back at it tomorrow, look at it with different eyes, and you will change it, and just do that until you can refine it. And I like the way you put the parallel between that and photography, even going to shoot out there. That's really good. So, James, I want to thank you for your time. I want to be mindful also. Otherwise, I think it's going to be bedtime for you in the UK soon. And I kind of want to ask just simply, where can people find you online? What do you want them to find you? What do you want them to look at?
So yeah, if they wanted to check out my YouTube channel, you can just type in my name, which is James, and then Popsys, Popsys. I also have an Instagram account by the same name. They're the two places, really. I have a website with, I sell the odd print, and I have a book. Aside from that, though, I think people should go out and shoot, unless they've done too much of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, James. We'll talk to you maybe in the next episode.
Thanks, Pierre.
Alright guys, I hope you have enjoyed the discussion. Remember, go check out James on Instagram and on YouTube at James Popsys, Popsys. And remember, hit us up anywhere, Twitter, anywhere, and let us know your thoughts. We're kind of curious, are you more of a fast shooter or of a slow shooter? It's kind of interesting to hear all the different philosophies around there. With that being said, guys, get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new, and share that podcast with your friend, your family, your groups, everyone. I can't wait to hear from you. Talk to you later. Bye.